Hi, I want to talk about news and what is news. What is news? What is newsworthiness? What makes something news? So we all have kind of an idea of what the news is. You know, we've watched the news, we read the news, we get news alerts, and so we all have kind of an idea. But the fact is that what you consider news and what I consider news may be different. That I might we might have a little bit different concept. We might emphasize different things. We might think certain things are more important than others. And so there's always a little bit of flexibility. But the other thing is there's still a question of what makes something news, what makes it more important, what makes it more worthy. If you only have so much time to report on things, what is news? Well, the first thing that I think comes up with news is, of course, the idea of timeliness. That news has the word in it, new, so you would think that it has new information or timely information. And so, timeliness is kind of one of the most important factors. Something that happens this week or today makes it news, but 2 weeks from now, it's not really news. If you kind of miss the opportunity to talk about it, it's not really new. I can't talk to you about, what I did, and put it in the newspaper of, great big story, I did this 3 years ago. It's really only news for a certain period of time, for a certain time element. Unless things change, and then it can be kind of the news is whatever the new development is, whatever the newest part of the story is. But oftentimes that changes, but it's oftentimes very hyper time sensitive what makes news. Which also leads to there's an old saying that trying to tell what is going on in the world by reading a newspaper is like trying to tell the time by watching the second hand of a clock. If you only see that hand moving, you're never going to know the minute or hour. You're only going to know what second it is. And news is kind of like that. It gives you a really close look at what's going on right now, but it doesn't necessarily give you the context to greater things. Now, that's not always true, because some of the other things that make things newsworthy, might be analysis and everything. So newspapers do, but news, especially now, like a newspaper tends to be very hyper time limited and local, whereas magazines tend to be a little bit larger picture, and then books and things tend to be even larger picture, give you a little bit more context. So you kind of need all of them, but all of them can be news. It's just I think that traditionally news in the traditional sense of like what you get in a newspaper was very time sensitive and was not very contextualized. So some of the other things that give it is, if I'm just looking at the book, is impact or magnitude. So the thing here is something that's going to hurt, impact 20 people is more important than something that's going to impact nobody. Something that has a big effect is going to be a bigger deal. So for example, if they're going to do road repairs on, I-55 and they're going to close it down for a week, that's probably more important to you than the fact that like the road in front of my neighborhood was closed Monday and Tuesday of this week, so I had to go a different route. So, the newsworthiness, how well you would play it, where you would put that in the paper, where you would put that on your website, is going to be impacted by the number of people and how much you write, how, if you're going to staff it, if you're going to get a photo. I-55 being closed is going to impact a lot of people. It's going to be more important. And this has somewhat of a role, like, for example, also like the impact can have this can be a big thing about like local news. If you have a local news website, like, or the LAMP or the State Journal Register or any other local paper, the fact is something that's happening locally and is going to affect people there a lot, may be more important. That may be bigger impact, but it's 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away or around the world. And so, for example, a bomb exploding, like a couple weeks ago, as I'm making this video, there was a big explosion in Lebanon, I believe, and there was, kind of an old munitions, fireworks kind of depot that exploded, and it was a big deal, but it's also like 9,000 miles away. And so that may not be as big of a deal as, say, for example, for the local impact as something, for example, well, not a few months ago, there was a shooting at Bonn. That would be maybe, there are fewer people hurt. It probably had more or less damage, but that's a bigger deal here. And so you kind of have to keep an eye on what your publication is and where it is. And so there's a little bit of impact magnitude, but that also comes into proximity, that, you know, things that are local should be important. One thing to keep in mind with proximity is when you talk about local news is, you know, for example, people sometimes say like, oh, I want to cover, you know, like with sports, I want to cover the Cardinals, or I want to cover the Olympics, or I want to cover the, you know, the Blues or the Cubs or the Blackhawks or whatever, you know, they want to cover these bigger things. But if you work for a local newspaper, the reality is you can get that information from The Wire, you can get it from other sites. People can go to the MLB.com and get the information. They can get it from other sites. And so one thing to keep in mind is there aren't too many people covering, for example, the Junior Blues or the Springfield Sliders or things like that. And so that offers you a chance to provide unique content that nobody else has. And so that's kind of what makes, and like why local papers tend to focus on local things, because people can't get that anywhere else. They can get those other stories other places. And so they're not willing to pay you to do it, but they are willing to pay you to have local stories with local content. You go with what's new. Another one is prominence. Prominence is you know, the prominence of the people, the prominence of the situation. For example, if you know, a couple summers ago, J.B. Pritzker got a ticket for speeding in his boat in Wisconsin, at Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It's a big resort area, a lot of expensive homes along it. I actually interviewed for a job there at the newspaper, and I was offered the job but didn't take it. And so the case is that, you know, Lake Geneva is a very nice town, but he was there and he was on his boat and he was speeding, he was going too fast, and there's a whole setup to it. You know, it happened at like 5:01 or I'm sorry, it happened like 8:02, and the speed limit on the lake drops at sunset, and sunset was 8:01. He got ticketed and pulled over at 8:02. So there's a little bit of kind of a funny, he's getting a ticket for 1 minute after it breaking the rules, you know, kind of thing. But the fact that it's J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, is making it more, he has more prominence. If I got stopped for speeding on Lake Geneva, you know, that's not news really. Nobody cares, you know, I mean, you know, maybe, you know, I care and maybe some people I know, but nobody, it's not going to be front page news or, you know, on the Wire or on, you know, on the newscast or anything, because I have no prominence. And so the prominence of people makes a difference. Unusualness. There's also a little bit of unusualness even in that story I gave you, but unusualness can make something that's no longer timely newsworthy. You can't always make it newsworthy, but sometimes if you do a feature or do something a little bit kind of a different angle about its unusualness, that makes it important. Now, the unusualness can be the fact that, for example, a weird crime, for example, you know, a stray dog isn't really, you know, anything. It may be contemporary, you know, maybe timely. That there's a stray dog that the pound is looking for. But if the stray dog lives in the, and is seen at the top of the Pillsbury grain silos on the north side of Springfield, that is very unusual. You don't usually see dogs, you know, 10, 15 stories up in the air, you know, standing atop buildings that are abandoned and have been for years. And how's the dog getting up there? Who knows? And the dog's seen around. And so that's kind of the thing that makes that unusual, makes it timely. I was just talking about, let me see if I can share my screen real quick. I was just talking with somebody about the fact that my hometown, we were talking about Burger King, and I was saying that in my hometown, we have a place called Burger King. This is it right here. It is not the chain restaurant. It's actually it's actually just this little itty bitty kind of, this is it right here. They used to rope this area off here where these truck and van is. They used to put on tape on Friday nights, and the kids in town would hang out. I don't think I ever hung out there, but they did. There was a movie theater just like a block away. And so you'd go to the movies and you'd go over there and hang out at Burger King on a Friday night, because that's what you do when you live in a small town. But this is Burger King, and Burger King, basically the long story short is it is not part of the chain. What happened was a guy named Gene Hoots created this burger joint called Burger King. They serve like these kind of thin little burgers, and they created this burger joint, and I think so. So he opens it, and he gets a copyright for the name from the state of Illinois. Well, 5-10 years later, a group wants to create the Whopper-based Burger King, decides to open, and they get a federal copyright or trademark on the name. And so eventually they realize they're both using the same name, and they sue each other. And basically, long story short, they said, okay, Burger King has a federal copyright that trumps the local one, but the local one has to have some meaning, given that, you know, one would have an expectation that it had meaning. And so what happened is that the federal court said, you're only operating within a limited region, you only wanted a limited copyright, therefore we'll give you a 30-mile area around your restaurant where Burger King, the chain, cannot open. And you kind of have exclusive rights to that name in that location. And so they're the only one. Now, that's not news. That happened 60, 70 years ago. But every once in a while, somebody will do a story about it because it's sort of an unusual thing. That's kind of the thing where it's not really newsworthy, or it's not really timely. It's maybe a little unusual, but it's the unusualness that makes it newsworthy every once in a while. You know, it's kind of like, hey, there's this place that's kind of weird. Now, if you're from Mattoon or you live in that area, it's not really anything special. You know, but there are other things around, like where I grew up, like in a town called Gays, Illinois. It's Gays. There's a cemetery there, which I have several family members buried in. My parents' graves. My brother has a grave plot there, and they aren't dead, but they have plots. There's a thing called a two-story outhouse. This here is the two-story outhouse. It used to be that the people owned a little store next door, and they had an apartment above it. And so instead of going all the way downstairs and outside at night to use the bathroom before plumbing, they built a two-story outhouse. And it's designed where, you know, the front has a, you know, the front part, you sit down and there's a wall. Well, behind it, there's another wall, and that's the area where the toilet above goes. So, you know, there's no, you know, sitting atop each other or anything. So anyway, and that's where that came from. It's still there. It's kind of a weird little thing, but that's been there a long time. And that's sort of thing that would be the unusualness that makes it newsworthy.